Hello to all students. Welcome back to the 5 great ideas in American public administration. We're going to get into idea number 2 right now, classic management models. So the first idea was honest, nonpartisan, business-like government, which we seem to be still struggling with, right, in our country. So although it seems like we're back to that now with Trump in power. So maybe we did a whole roundabout. Remember, there's 5 ideas. We're on idea number 2 right now. So I'm going to talk briefly about idea number 2, leading into it, how it came about. Also, I may discuss a little more about the separation from politics, scientific management, and historical context, and something called Weberian bureaucracy, which some students actually may have heard of prior to this. So, after public administration established itself as a field distinct from politics, the dominant focus then shifted to achieving machine-like efficiency in government organizations, government operations. Recall that idea number 2 was all about that. They wanted to make government more like the people in power at the time, wanted to be more government more like a machine, like a efficient business, which people who are in business or have worked in business know that's businesses are not like that, right? Business has problems. This era of the idea number 2 of classic management models, it's strongly influenced by the principles of something called scientific management and classic organizational theory. And they sought to apply to universal laws or principles of administration, borrowed from the business world into public sector organizations. The resulting closed model of administration emphasized hierarchy, specialization, formal rules, and a rational, impersonal approach to management. While this approach provided a structural skeleton for organizations, it ultimately proved inadequate for addressing the complexities of human behavior and the dynamic nature of the public sector, which is something that idea number 3 leads into, which is politics and policy making. So, excuse me. Excuse me. Historical context and theoretical foundations. So the separation of from politics. Once administration was accepted as separate from politics and functionally similar to business, the focus became maximizing efficiency and minimizing waste in government, mirroring the priorities of the private sector, which it had borrowed from, right? So then, of course, there was a guy named Frederick Taylor. Now, this Frederick Taylor was a very interesting guy, and I first studied Frederick when I was just like you guys in the master's program, more than 20 years ago. Frederick Taylor was trained as an engineer, and his whole thing was, look, there has to be always one best way to do something, the scientific method, basically. He had an interesting story to him. He created some kind of really, really good golf club that was so accurate, a putter, I think, and I don't play golf, so don't quote me on this, but it was a putter that was so good that the U.S. Golfing Association actually banned it. They refused to allow it to be used. But Frederick Taylor's notable work was scientific management, and he was pushing for he pushed that movement for scientific management. He had previously worked in railroads, and he had tried to keep railroads on time and on track. He was known for something like that. So he was somebody who was really focused on achieving the best he could. His fallacy, I think, was that, people are not machines. People have feelings, people have emotions, they have thoughts, they have good days and maybe not so good days, and that's how it is. So, but he was pushing for that, and his thing was one thing. I mean, the one thing he's really known for was there's always one best way to do something, to perform tasks, to manage people, to get workers, prepared for any execution of the plan. This approach then assumed that efficiency could be engineered through a careful analysis, standardization, and training. But as I mentioned, that's not entirely true. In fact, I think if you look him online, I don't think it mentions in the article as much, but the U.S. Postal Service is really upset with him because they felt that he was trying to union. They were a union at that time, and they felt that he was trying to control them too much. He had even testified in front of Congress as to how to make the Postal Service work more efficiently, because he had come from the railroad side. And railroads at that time, they were known for being on time and they were efficient, because the profit motive. if railroads don't come on time, people are not going to take the railroad, and maybe they'll take something else, or maybe your competitor will come along. But the U.S. Postal Service is a monopoly. There's only one first-class postage service, and that's the U.S. Postal Service. So it was not really possible to make it move faster or get things done more efficiently. And I think everybody knows this, the jokes we have in the United States, right, with our DMV people, with the Postal Service. They both government functioning as monopolies. Now, there were universal principles that this idea number 2 operates on, such as, for example, two other people I should name with you, Henri Fayol and Luther Gulick. Henri Fayol and Luther Gulick were really known for division of labor, which I think probably everybody knows by now. Any job you've worked at, there's always meetings that happen, and then in the meeting the boss will say something like, well, I'm going to delegate this task to person A, and person B does it, person C, and so forth. So division of labor, of course, and the hierarchy, the boss tells you to subordinates, which I want you to do. Luther Gulick and Henri Fayol, who's a Frenchman, they identified this. They talked about hierarchy, of course, unity of command, which wherever the span of control is, and I think everybody probably knows this. Organizational charts from the top to the bottom. Either they're a triangle generally, or maybe a rectangle sometimes. Generally a triangle because, for example, TSU is easy, right? The president, the board of regents, which controls the president. The president controls the provost controls all the deans control the chairs control the faculty don't control anybody. They try to, but they really can't. So, that's how it is. Core function of management, Weber bureaucracy. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Max Weber. Max Weber is one of my favorite political science public relation theorists. Because he was really known. First, he was very German. He was a very German, meaning everything was very efficient and everything in a place and all that stuff. If you know any Germans, they're very particular about something, and if you make, they're not very humorous people. Let's put it that way. At least the Germans I've known. So Max Weber's ideal type bureaucracy became the model for all kind of rational, efficient organizations. The key features, of course, were something like a clearly defined hierarchy and chain of command, impersonality and merit-based achievement. I did say German, right? Written rules and standardized procedures, which sounds familiar, right? That's all pretty much what human resources, HR, right? A division of labor and specialization. The closed model. Now, then there's a definition of the closed model, which refers to organizations that are internally focused with little attention to external influences. The structure is formal, vertical, and mechanicistic, prioritizing efficiency, predictability, and control. Now, the strengths, of course, with the closed model is they provide a clear organizational structure and division responsibilities. Again, this goes back to anybody who's worked in any organization, right? They have a closed model pretty much. TSU is a public university, but it is a closed model for the most part, I think. Enable large-scale coordination and consistent implementation of policies. Again, very, very true, right? There's a student handbook, there's a faculty handbook, there's MAP policies, for example, on a campus. Emphasize accountability and rationality in decision-making. Limitations and critiques. Overlook the complexity of human motivation and informal organizational dynamics. Could lead to rigidity, resistance to change, and excessive red tape. Fail to account for the need of flexibility and adaptation in a changing environment. And they treated organizations as machines rather than social systems. This is something critically important that even today, probably 100 years, 150 years since all of this is written, it still goes on. What's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, possibly in Austin, in the state legislature, is very similar. Legislative branch, the executive branch, they want to control the bureaucracy, the public sector bureaucracy, make them work longer, faster, harder as a machine. But I think everybody understands this and knows this, but they forget it. Machines also need time off. There's no machine you can think of that doesn't have time off. Really, if you think about any machine, even the machines in our own homes, like refrigerators, microwaves, cars, they all need time off. They all have built-in switches and need times off. So, or they slow down. When you open a fridge, for example, it's humming, it's alive. And when you close the fridge, the systems do power down. But people also need that, right? That's why it doesn't make sense many times what they try to put into a government and make people work like machines. It's not really possible to do that. Even students cannot do that, of course, or professors. Now, Herbert Simon. This guy I really want to speak to you about. Okay, one of my favorite political public administration people. Herbert Simon, very interesting guy. He won a Nobel Prize in economics, I think in 1978. Don't hold me to that because it's been a while since I read about him. But Herbert Simon was a very interesting guy. He was in World War II. He served in World War II in the Navy, I think. That's not really that important over here. But Herbert Simon, phenomenally intelligent guy, very accomplished. And what he did was he introduced something called the concept of bounded rationality. Bounded rationality and something else called satisficing, which I'm going to discuss in depth more now. Bounded rationality was something that pretty much all public sector bureaucrats pretty much do, which is you control what you control, what you can control basically. And if you can't control it, that's okay. You work within the boundaries, within the rational boundaries of whatever you can get done. Your decision making is going to be limited by your human cognitive, your thinking capacity, and incomplete information. Because let's be honest, we never have all the information in front of us. No matter how smart you may think you are, or how wise, or how much information you have coming at you, which we have an avalanche of information on a daily basis. There's no way that you know everything. It's not possible. I don't know everything about public administration. There's no way that anybody knows everything. It's not possible. So you have to operate bounded rationality. What you see in front of you is what the decision making can be done. And Herbert Simon was one of the very few people who figured this out and was able to put it into complete sentences. The other thing he discussed, which was a big deal at that time, was something called satisficing. Satisficing is something that a lot of students should really know about. And what that simply means is you just satisfice, meaning you, instead of satisfying, you satisfice, meaning it's sufficient enough that it's satisfying. So, it's good enough for government, it's good enough for the public, okay. It doesn't have to be a grade A software, it can be grade B, maybe a C. Some of you may know people who work in Social Security Administration, for example. You've heard stories. Social Security is notorious for having very antiquated and very old computer systems. Even our nuclear launches, our launch codes, and our nuclear silos, some of them operate on like floppy disk. If you don't know what that is, you should look it up. But it is very old, antiquated systems, and they need to upgrade them. But every year, Congress, cuts the budget, or they don't want to allocate enough money to the detriment of our national security to some degree. But it's satisficing. It's good enough. We can manage. Hopefully, Russia or China, Iran will not try to attack us. The legacy. So, last thing I'm gonna talk about now regarding the people I've discussed, Henri Fayol, Luther Gulick, Herbert Simon, is the legacy of the classic management model of idea number 2. So it laid the groundwork for modern public administration, building up on from idea 1, by providing a structure, a procedural foundation, a more in-depth stuff from everything I discussed, satisficing, Max Weber, of course, with ideal type bureaucracy, hierarchy chain of command. You can see now that government was now becoming more serious. The government was basically like getting out of its teenage years and was becoming like an adult. That's really what was happening. Actually, it was the maturing of a government. Actually, really after since the Civil War, actually, in the United States, that's when you really see our government becoming more adult-like. Actually, But the problem was, of course, this leads into idea number 3. With idea number 2 was that the shortcomings prompted the development of later models that emphasize human relations, organizational behavior, open systems, which leads you into politics and policy making, which I will discuss more in idea number 3. I will see you then.